Hello, welcome to PlannerPod, episode 7. I'm Simon Wicks, editor of the Planner magazine. With me today are my co-host, Ben Gosling, senior writer for the Planner, and Laura Edgar, our news editor. It's International Women's Day on March the 8th, and this year's theme for UN International Women's Day is Rights, Justice, Action for all women and girls. But what does that mean in planning terms? Well, today we have a very special guest who's going to be talking about the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy and its relationship or non-relationship to planning. We have Anna Sabine, MP for Frome and East Somerset, and a former woman of influence, by the way, in 2019, who recently wrote a letter to Matthew Pennycook. Now, I'm just going to give a little bit of background here. So in late 2025, the government launched its Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. That was launched by Jess Phillips, the Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, and she pledged to work with all departments on the government's Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. This was also sort of backed up by the Angelini inquiry, which was the inquiry commissioned after the murder of Sarah Everard. And both of these documents recommend that women's safety be embedded into the planning of public spaces. We've just had a new NPPF launched, a proposed NPPF, which is under consultation, and it doesn't appear to say anything about the safety of women and girls. So, Anna, you and your colleague Gideon Amos, you wrote a letter to Matthew Pennycook, didn't you? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we wrote to Matthew Pennycook and Jess Phillips, actually. And I should say that although I'm a Lib Dem MP, I have huge respect for Jess Phillips. I think she's amazing. I think she really cares about this issue. And I think we anticipated getting a kind of worthy response along the lines of, yes, you're quite right, we should look at it or something. And instead, what we got, or rather what The Guardian got, because The Guardian picked up this story and made their own inquiries of MHCOG, was this incredibly damning response along the lines of the NPPF is a planning document. The Violence Against Women and Girls strategy is a strategy about violence against women and girls. And we see no reason as to why these two things would have any relationship to each other. And that was the end of the comment. And I still haven't had a reply to my letter from Matthew Pennycook nor from Jess Phillips. And I just found the whole thing rather astonishing because I'm not a planner. I've worked in the sector, but I'm not a planning expert. But even I have understood in my years in the sector the importance of designing places and spaces with the women and girls in mind. And the fact that the department that's responsible for this, whoever had been asked to do the quote, and I hope it was some junior comms person that did that quote. I hope that was not a senior person in MHCOG signed that off. The department that's responsible for it has no idea why the fact that you're a government that's campaigning on violence against women and girls would have anything to do with your strategy for the built environment. It's just phenomenal.
I mean, outside of government, clearly you've had nothing except for this rather sort of paltry response from MHCLG given to The Guardian, which is extraordinary. Anyway, outside of the department, have you had any reaction or response from anybody else? I mean, other MPs, for example, campaigners, people within your constituency?
Anyone who knows anything about this has had kind of jaw hitting the floor.
Right.
So I'm in touch with lots of old friends from the industry who are largely kind of women in urban design, and they're all astonished and outraged by the response. I haven't broadened it out particularly actually past Lib Dem MPs yet, who've also been horrified. I fully intend to broaden it out. I'd like to talk to cross-party to other MPs about it. I keep meaning to actually just grab Jess Phillips in the voting lobby and say, Jess, have you clocked this letter and have you clocked what MHCOG have said? Because I suspect she'd be horrified. And I also would like to broaden it out by talking to some of the groups I'm aware of through around work on kind of domestic violence and stuff, some of the groups that campaign on these issues and say, is this something you'd like to get involved in and support as well? Because I think it's genuinely really shocking and something that actually normally when you point these things out to people, they realise there's a problem. And I live in optimistic hope that if we point this out to MHCLG, they might do something about it.
I was actually just going to comment that I'd be really surprised if Jess didn't get back, because she said she wanted every department to be involved with the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy and making it work. So I'd just be very disappointed if she didn't respond at all. I mean, I hope if she hasn't seen the letter, then that explains that. But if she has seen the letter, it would be very disappointing, given she wants all the departments to be involved. And it has to be a cross-government initiative. I just find it very disappointing as a woman if you've not had anything.
But I think that the interesting thing, and we've talked about this before, about if you look at the government at the moment, I mean, within recent weeks, we've had Peter Mandelson being arrested over his Epstein links. We have a member of the royal family being arrested over their Epstein links. You have the government appointing Mandelson to that role. I'm not trying to make it party political, but you have to question whether governments, when they talk about Vorg strategies, whether they really, really in their bones believe in their Vorg strategy, or whether they go, we've got Jess Phillips, she's a really good campaigner on these issues. It is important. Get Jess over there doing the Vorg bit, and we can all get on with appointing Mandelson to being our ambassador. Because I don't think that the government in their bones feel the passion around Vorg, probably because the main movers and shakers are still men, and until recently are men. You look at that little coterie around Star, until recently it was men. And I'm really struck by the fact that Harriet Harman wants it to become the fifth mission of government, that this becomes their key strand. And I absolutely think they need to do that. And I hope that what's happened recently will push them to do that. And I also hope that Jess hasn't seen the letter. I hope that someone in the civil service has decided it's not worth putting under her nose. But I think she would want to see it.
I think it's important that she sees it. I think the situation obviously goes wider than just planning. It obviously needs to be sorted out at the root of government if this is what we're dealing with. And I just think it's disappointing if they don't back it.
So what form would it take practically? What would you like to see in the NPPF ideally?
I, as a non-planner, don't have a firm view on what it looks like, other than that I think it needs to be central to the NPPF. It needs to require any organisation like a local authority that's having to pay heed to the NPPF needs to take into account at the very earliest stages designing in safety. And not just safety, designing in the concept that we can thrive and belong in public spaces. Not just that we're safe. Being safe should be the minimum requirement that women and girls expect from our society. So I want to see that in very centrally to the NPPF. But what we've now done, in fury at the lack of response, or rather the dismissive response from MHCOG, we've drafted another letter, which I'm inviting people in the industry to sign up to, which requests a kind of Grenfell-style inquiry into women and girls' safety in the built environment. And for the government to actually look, if you look at the numbers of women that are being killed, either when they're out and about or in terms of domestic violence, we know it's a huge national emergency, it's a societal emergency, and we would like the government to actually set up some kind of body to actually look at this link between the safety, the way we design the built environment, and women and girls' safety.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fairly astonishing that they've told you that women's safety and planning are two discrete issues, especially when we look at their attitude to things like growth. This kind of imperative where every department is, I think, supposed to demonstrate how their work is contributing to growth, So they've shown that they can pull together in kind of pursuit of these aims if the will is there.
But they don't know, but they have a treasury that talks about growth, and then they have different departments constantly making decisions that don't contribute towards growth, which I find kind of interesting. This is someone that's new to politics. And actually I was responding yesterday to a constituent who'd written to me about the fact that the budget paid no regard to women and girls specifically as an issue. So I can totally believe that you have a government that wants growth and hasn't actually thought about, how could improving the lot of women and girls also contribute to growth. Everything's totally siloed in a kind of fairly spectacular way, I think. Unhelpful way.
Last night, we were both present at an event put on by Cornerstone Barristers, where you were a panellist for a discussion about this very issue. And there were some really, really, really interesting points raised by the panelists, by you, by Francesca Sidoli, and by Susanna Walker, who is also one of our women of influence for this year. And there were some really interesting things came out. So I'm going to talk for a moment just around this and set a bit of context. So among the things that came out were the information that in the region of 1 woman is killed in the UK every 3 days. Around about 60% of those are domestically related, or rather partners or ex-partners. In fact, it's somewhat more that are domestic related, because that doesn't count sons and fathers who also kill a number of women. And one of the things that was said last night, which struck me, was that because it's more women who are killed in those settings, not enough attention is paid to the built environment. But if you're talking 60% or 70%, you've still got 30 to 40% of women killed every year who are killed outside of the home, outside of domestic settings, within public spaces and within the public sphere. And that's still, 50, 60 women, something like that. This is really serious. I mean, this is a really grave thing. And that's not even taking into account the attacks, the small acts of harassment, the catcalling, the public touching, all different forms of sexual harassment. I mean, do you feel as a woman, because obviously I can't speak to your experience, do you feel safe? when you're out and about?
I don't think that women, if you stop and think about it, I don't think women think about their safety anymore because we're so used to it. And safety tools, I think, was mentioned last night, which is this concept that you take the short route, you have your keys in your hand. You know, when I finish late in Parliament, I will always ring my partner on the way back home to say that I'm on my way back home and ask him to talk me through the last bit of the journey. Because do I think I'm going to be attacked? No, probably not. But I don't feel safe. And I think it's just built into our experience of the built environment. I was struck by some of the comments about kind of hanging around and how we talked about skate parks and about boys hanging around and how when you see groups of boys hanging around, they obviously feel entitled to hang around in that space. They feel comfortable hanging about and owning that space. You don't tend to see big groups of girls hanging around. My teenage girls in my family don't go and hang about in the way that boys do. And I think there's something about just not feeling as comfortable in public spaces as men, just constantly being slightly alert. Where were we walking? My daughter and I walked the dog the other day and a guy came up behind us with headphones and we moved slightly out of the way to let him go past and he didn't go past, he stayed behind us. And actually I think he just slightly misread how we were moving and he ended up walking around us and it was fine, but we both commented on it. That's totally normal. That's just totally normal behaviour. To the point where when we talk about women being killed in the public space, that's obviously really important, but it's not the... Most of us aren't going to be killed in the public space. Yeah. Most of us are going to experience low-level anxiety or fear in the public space, and that's not acceptable.
I mean, one of the points that was made last night was the difference between perception and reality. So if you look at things statistically, it tells one story, but our perception of public space.
Well, the thing I thought was amazing last night was there was someone there from TfL who said that something like 95% or something of girls have been harassed on their way to school when they're wearing school uniform. But the vast majority of that will never be reported. So when people say, well, look at the statistics, you go, well, hang on a minute. Most of women's lived experience of being hassled in the public space is not in statistics. I don't report to the police every time someone catcalls me or says, but it happens. It's wildly underreported compared to the amount that's happening.
Laura, do you have any observations on this? I mean, can you bring your experience to bear on this?
Well, I think I was about 26 when somebody pulled alongside me at 6 o'clock in the evening on the way home from work. And we won't go into what he was doing, but he did end up on the sex offenders register. So up until that point, I did feel reasonably safe in London. And that was a very well-lit family estate, so it can happen anywhere. I didn't feel particularly safe after that, and you do walk around with your keys in your hand, but you do just get on. You can't stop. You can't stop your life. You still have to go out and do it, so you do just carry on. Did I feel safe in London after that? Not particularly.
But Laura and I have the benefit of still being... Laura's online, but we both look brilliantly young, Laura. And I think there was an interesting discussion as well about older people and how a lot of older women, particularly if they're living by themselves, if they're widowed, just simply won't go out after dark unless they can drive there. And I think there's a real thing about how your life can close down depending on your circumstances.
Yeah.
Your ability to engage in the world could really shut down depending on your comfortableness or not of being out in public spaces.
I mean, I live in the countryside now and I do a lot of running. I mean, my partner will go running across the fields, trail running in the evening in the dark on his own. I won't do that. I'll just do a couple of laps around the village if I want to go for a run in the dark on my own. I would not wander off.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it can be very limiting if you are older and feel unsafe, for sure.
And I'm doing a campaign in my constituency at the moment about rural safety specifically, because quite often when we talk about women's safety, we talk about things like bus routes or pubs or well-lit streets. There's a whole separate challenge if you live in a village, and I've got a constituent who was flashed repeatedly in the same location in her village, and that's why this issue came to me. And we were talking about what can we do in rural areas where it might not be appropriate to light everything, but is there ways we can get people to be connected with each other or come up with a kind of safety network? What could we do to make people in rural areas feel safe as well? And that's a kind of another additional challenge that doesn't really get talked about.
So that leads us into what this might look like. So, let's say we were to introduce a requirement for local authorities and developers within the NPPF to acknowledge women's safety and girls' safety every time they do a piece of work, introduce a piece of policy, plot a new development, whatever. What's that actually going to look like in practice?
in practice, there needs to be an element of listening to women and girls, like properly listening to women and girls about their lived experience. And also sometimes acknowledging that might be challenging. So I remember working on a project when I worked in the industry with young people, actually. And when you talk to young people about public spaces, what they really wanted was somewhere to hang about and chat to each other, but that felt private. And you could see the kind of planners in the room going, oh God, the safety people aren't going to like this. They're not going to want kind of slightly secluded benches for young people to hang around on, because that conflicts with perceptions of what's safe. But actually that's what young people wanted to do. They wanted to hang about, be prepared to have, some challenging conversations with women in the room. And then in terms of the specifics, I mean, a lot of this comes back to money, and there's been a lot of discussion about gender budgeting, and I would like there to be something around, and we talk a lot about sports pitches, this idea that if a developer's contributing, I don't know, £1 million to a sports pitch, that's probably quite a nice sports pitch, but if that's 90% used by men and boys, that's not fair gender budgeting. So I'd like there to be some acknowledgement, and that's probably quite a simple way of developers and others understanding it. If you're spending X amount of money on things to do with the public realm, how much of that's being used by men, how much by women, and can we try and have some equivalence?
So that was Susanna Walker last night, spoke about this really interestingly. She talked about the proportion of use by boys and by girls of sports pitches in particular, and how, in fact, she has previously challenged that under the Equalities Act, because there's no other route. There's nothing within the NPPF. But she's had a measure of success, I think, if only in terms of making people sit up and take notice.
But that's really challenging, right? Because as a woman, if you're going to say, I don't think we should have a sports pitch here, because can you imagine the backlash from all the sports clubs in that given area who'll be like, well, we want the sports pitch because it's very hard, particularly as a woman, to be the person that's trying to disrupt what we're all so used to and what we take for granted. And of course, Susanna and others are not saying we shouldn't have football pitches or we shouldn't have whatever, but it's about an acknowledgement that you've got to create places and spaces that everyone's going to use. And just because women could use a football pitch doesn't mean in practice they're going to use it. That's the issue.
She also talked, or I think it might have been Francesca who talked about the methods by which these things could be secured. So measures that are more beneficial to women and girls, make women and girls feel more safe within the built environment. She said we can make more rigorous and tougher use of Section 106 agreements and community infrastructure levy and that sort of thing. What are your, given you're not a planner, you're not that acquainted with the system, I mean, do you think there needs to be that level of obligation for developers?
Yeah, and I think that my experience of planning was that it's very if I say tick box, that's not to denigrate it, but there's a series of checklists of things you have to go through to get an app, and I think it should be added to the relevant checklist. I think that when a planner, be they working for a developer or a local authority, sits there going, have we done everything? There needs to be that in their tick box of things they've got to get done. But it's got to have some weight. I know we might come onto it, but I spent a long time working in public consultation, and I felt like that was a document that got done and submitted, and no one ever looked at it again. There's got to be something that means it's actually then taken into account and locked in for the rest of the build-out process.
And another of the discussions last night was around the PPG on design. So the new PPG on design, which does contain reference to women's safety. And one of the people at the discussion last night said, what's the problem? It's there. And Susanna rightly pointed out, well, actually, the primary document here is the NPPF.
But also the person pointed it out, said, don't worry, it's in there. It's in like page 87, subsection 3, section 0.7. And you're like, well, is that it?
Yeah. And also, this is more than about just design, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about everything. It's about transport infrastructure. It's about design. It's about, we were talking last night about new towns, and, it's about whether you could co-locate schools and train stations and health clinics and all the kind of things that women traditionally might need to go to in one place, which would make it much easier for women to get around. All kinds of ways in which this stuff should be included. It's not just about, is there adequate street lighting? It's a really unholistic approach to the challenge.
I think that if you are thinking about women's safety and girls' safety, that actually extends to the ability to make sure that older people can get around safely, and that it helps their mobility if things are sited together. Children's ability to play, it all can work together. If it's a safe environment for a woman, it's a safe environment for other people as well.
Yes, so I think I'm nicking Susanna's line again. Women's safety are the otters of the built environment. It's a measure. If you see women out and about, it means it's a healthy society.
But I wouldn't dream of referring to women as otters.
No, I thought it was interesting, but let's move on from the otter analogy.
Yeah. Ben, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned working on another letter where you're trying to bring people who are working in the sector along with you. What's the kind of response to your first letter from the planning sector been? Because, sort of changes to policy like this will require support from the entire sector.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage people to tell me, people that are listening to this, what their response is. I have to say, I didn't think it would become a big thing. I thought we'd ping in the letter and I'd get a kind of sensible-ish response and I'd kind of almost tick it off my list. And the fact that they've been so dismissive has kind of enraged me. So it's kind of turned into an accidental campaign. And this has only happened in the last week or so. So I'm keen to engage with the sector. And that's partly why, we went along to this thing at Cornerstone last night to try and speak to the sector and say, have you guys noticed, because I know when you're head down in your day-to-day work, have you guys noticed that the MHCLG hasn't clocked this at all and is actually being quite dismissive of it? And don't you think we should do something about it? So if anyone wants to join me in rallying behind me and continually sending letters demanding more and more to MHCLG each time they ignore something, God knows what we'll be demanding by the end. I intend to stand outside MHCLG with my giant Corex letter that everyone has signed and basically try and embarrass Matthew Pennycook into realising that I don't think he and Jess Phillips know MHCLG have said that, but I fully intend to embarrass them into finding out and doing something about it.
So this giant letter, you had it with you last
My
night.
giant letter, it's A0 size for those of you that like to know.
It's about 4 feet high.
Yeah.
And it's now got a number of people's signatures on it as well. So that's quite a sort of...
you have to have an effort. It has to be visually interesting. Yeah. And I feel like turning up outside with a giant letter is a good thing to do.
You need to get a photographer along.
Oh, of course. Everything's photographed in politics. So I'm going to present the giant letter. I'm also going to send him the letter. We have the system in Parliament. You can get hold of people if you see them in the corridor, right? That's quite helpful. But we also have pigeonholes. I have been thinking about putting copies of the letter with a little handwritten note in his and Jess Phillips' pigeonholes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of worth picking up on as well, that you kind of mentioned that, the response from government hasn't been great, particularly sort of even individual ministers who but if you're having to resort to kind of grabbing them in a corridor, that seems like a slight...
failure in the system.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. How does politics work? They're getting thousands of letters a day. I don't know who sifts which ones are seen as being important. I don't know how those decisions are made. I suspect, I'm a big fan of the thick of it and Veep. I suspect a lot of this stuff's cock up, not conspiracy. Yeah, I don't know. My other worry with it, I guess, is that where are we now? We're kind of on recording. We're in March. There's a lot of speculation. Starmer will be gone in May. We'll get a new housing minister and we all go round again.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I said to you earlier, under previous administrations, we basically took a decision at some point on the Planner to stop interviewing housing ministers because we'd interview them and a month later they'd be gone.
Yeah. It's
often in disgrace, it might be said.
I remember being told by the editor of Planning magazine about 20 years ago that he'd spoken to a housing minister who'd said, housing is just seen as a rung on the ladder to a more important portfolio.
But I mean, Pennycook at least has been in the role for getting on for 2 years now, which is a decent sign.
Yeah.
At least there's a degree of stability there. But of course, if the senior leadership of the Labour Party changes, that people will bring their own people.
It makes a huge practical difference. I've been campaigning on broadband in my constituency, and Chris Bryant was being really helpful on that when he was a relevant minister. He had a really rural constituency. He understood the challenges, and you just start to get somewhere, and then they change. And I don't even know who the minister is now. What do you know? He's got a kind of Edinburgh seat. I don't think he's as interested in that situation. It makes a big practical difference, that constant changing, in terms of progress you can make or not make.
So this is quite a good departure point, actually, to get into some other topics around your role as an MP. So, you previously worked in built environment communications and public affairs. So you would have some knowledge already of the system and how it works and what it might be like culturally. So 2 questions. First is, why did you stand as an MP, particularly if you knew what it was like? And second, how are you finding it? Is your perception of what politics is like and what Parliament is like changing?
I find these questions really hard. So the first question's easy. I stood because I was really irritated. I'd always been interested in politics and followed politics, but I kind of always thought it was for somebody else to do. And I just became, when we had the Johnson government and Truss, I kind of felt that one, they were so bad. It was like, hang on a minute, people like me are vaguely competent. I really should stand. But secondly, that people like Truss, Johnson, Trump in America were kind of undermining what politics meant. And I'm very kind of straight down the line. It's not cricket to kind of cheat at these things. And I felt like if you were my kids' generation, they were kind of mid-teenagers at the time, what would you think politics was for? Would you think politics would achieve anything positive? So there was a bit of that slightly egotistical thing about I'll go and stand. When good people do nothing, all it takes for evil to triumph, etc. And as it happened, I hadn't got very organised about it, but a friend of mine who works in the Lib Dems had said, have you clocked that there's a new constituency being formed near you? And there's not many people have kind of noticed it's there. Would you like to go and try and stand for it? So I got selected and elected very quickly. I did know a bit about what MPs did, but I don't think I'd ever thought about the lived experience of being an MP. And it's a very, very strange job. And it's wonderful, clearly, in some respects. You're in a very privileged position. You're one of 650 legislators in the country. It's quite an elevated position. I think you could probably let the ego get you very quickly. But if you're someone that really wants to achieve things, and if you're someone that's come from a business background like me, I think you can't help but look at it and go, this is not how you would run anything. If you could start from the beginning. The way that Parliament itself functions is really odd. I mean, we're sitting here recording. We didn't finish till gone 11 o'clock last night because we've had weeks of the government doing nothing, and suddenly they've packed 2 bills into one day. So you've got a lot of people who are quite often very exhausted trying to do the job. It feels, the feel of Parliament is very much like I imagine a kind of private boarding school would be. I'm a kind of state school kid, and there's a certain type of older male politician that seems totally at home. I mean, you'll go through the voting lobby and there's a particular MP in the Tories who's been there a long time. He'll sit there with his kind of cravat on reading a book, biography of Churchill in the corner with his feet up. And I can't imagine ever feeling comfortable enough in that place to feel that I could treat it as my own kind of members club. So there's something about that. But there's some wonderful things about it. Parliament's an incredibly friendly place to work. MPs are very friendly to each other across party. All the staff are so friendly. It's almost like a kind of bunker mentality. You're all trapped in this weird place. So it's a very strange mix of things. But I do get frustrated in situations like what we're talking about today. It frustrates me that you can't send a letter to a department and they go, oh yeah, that is a mistake. We'll do that. Everything's so slow and so complicated and so grinding. And you look at issues that are coming forwards like AI, there is no way that British politics, or any politics probably, can respond. AI is going to move far faster than we can move on anything. So there's some issues where you just feel a bit like you're being swept along with the tide, but politics thinks it can do more than it can about them. I mean, I could talk about this for hours.
Oh, so could I.
I mean, I thought it was interesting your observation about the MP sat in the corner with his Churchill biography about how sort of environment informs behaviour, which is really what we're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah, we absolutely are. And I think, I mean, I'm obviously part of a wave of new MPs. There were 300 odd new MPs that came in last time. And I think that's brought in a lot of people like me, but women in their kind of 40s. So a lot of the kind of, I suspect the culture would have been very different if I'd been a few parliaments ago. So are you going around with kind of, blokes being sexist? No, I haven't seen any of that. I'm sure it happens on the estate. I'm not being naive, but I don't think there's a kind of culture of that. But quietly, is there a culture of this is a man's space? Yeah. I mean, one of the ways in which you debate in Parliament is that you stand up and make interventions. So you stand up, someone would be speaking and you say, would the member give way? As a woman, standing up and asking someone to effectively shush so I can talk, that's not something we're culturally taught to do. And so there's something really interesting about, and you're given, there's no reason anyone would train you, but there's no training on it, right? You're just expected to stand up in front of potentially 600 other people, what can be quite a braying environment depending on the debate, and ask someone to shush so you can talk. That's culturally really hard for women to do. And I find that interesting all the time, and I have to remind myself to stop being such a nervy thing about it and just stand up and blooming speak, because I won't make any less sense than anyone else. But, when I was working in the built environment sector, I would kind of train other women in this about being confident and putting yourself forward. And then you're in this environment thinking, well, that's the kind of woman I am, and I find this nerve-wracking. So there are lots of kind of, subtle ways in which the building and the environment informs it. And that's why when we talk about this issue about whether we're going to spend £40 billion, £60 billion renovating the Houses of Parliament, personally, I think my preference would be we just turn it into something else and we go and have a purpose-built, modern, functioning building somewhere where everyone has a seat. Not everyone has a seat in the chamber. We've only got 430 seats, 650 people. Where everyone has an office that functions. Everyone has an office that doesn't have rats in it. Everyone has an office with windows. Some things that I think would be a nice treat for MPs to have functioning offices that I think would serve their constituencies better as well.
So Ben and I have had a debate about this, haven't we, a week or two back, because I pounced on a comment on LinkedIn. I mean, my first observation is my favourite description of Parliament is that the Palace of Westminster has a brooding Victorian masculine intensity about it.
Yeah.
So essentially, if you want to use the word like patriarchy, it's an embodiment of Victorian patriarchy. And I think it's impossible to escape from that. My other comment is that, let's turn it into a museum of democracy.
The other thing about the building itself is that when we turned up and there weren't enough women's loos, they've had to run around putting more women's loos in. And we also have a lady members room that I didn't know existed. But in the lady members room, I haven't been in it yet. There's apparently like a kind of flowery Laura Ashley sofa, an ironing board, and a little rail of clothes. And also, final thing on bigger women in Parliament, there's one of my colleagues had a ladder in her tights, and someone said, there's a really good, the speaker, if you go behind where the speaker sits, he's got like a box of useful stuff. Go and see if they've got tights in there. So she went round the back and said, is there going to be tights in the useful box? And it turned out the useful box just had ties in it. That's all that was in the useful box.
Ties, not tights.
So we're making we said we should have, like in our whip's office, we should have tights, tampons, other things that people other than men might need if they were stuck.
So tights, not ties. That should be the slogan.
No ties. There was only ties.
It should be tights, not ties. That should be your slogan.
I don't think I want to start that campaign yet. Don't want to irritate the speaker.
That is such a public school thing to do, though, isn't it? And it's such a sort of slightly ramshackle way to run things as well.
Well, it also assumes you've done debating at public school. I mean, I went to a nice sixth form. It was comprehensive, but it was nice. Yeah. We did public speaking. I did public speaking, but I didn't do debating. So there's a lot of etiquette around how you debate that it's kind of assumed you will know. Most of us don't do debating at school, like we don't do Latin.
My final comment on this particular strand of conversation is that everybody should watch the 1968 Lindsay Anderson film If.
I haven't seen it.
Which gives you a very strong sense of how public school culture infiltrates political life.
There's also a really good book about it that I now can't remember the name of. Someone like Justin from Radio 4 Today programme wrote it, and a couple of other people. And maybe it was him that wrote it. It was about kind of private school and how it informs public life. And
yes. Yeah.
Anyway,
moving on. Laura, do you have anything you want to sort of get stuck into?
Oh, I was just listening with great interest about the patriarchal building.
It is very patriarchal.
It's an extraordinary thing.
I mean, they have like doorkeepers that the doorkeepers are amazing, and they wear these kind of almost like regimental uniforms, but they're obviously designed for men. So you have like female doorkeepers, but they're effectively dressed in male outfits. If you actually stopped and thought about it, it's all very, very male.
Well, if you invented it from scratch now, it wouldn't look anything like it does now.
I think in this country, I don't know if everything's so sort of archaic and kind of, we derive a lot of our sense of democracy and so on from the traditions that we have. And so I wonder if people would start to feel slightly alienated if we had an entirely, purpose-built new parliament, which I think makes sense in a lot of ways. But they would possibly, start to feel slightly alienated from that sense of history, which kind of underpins our sort of culture of democracy.
Yeah, I get that, but I wonder whether that, if you don't mind me saying, slightly overstates how much the average person understands where Parliament is or what it does. And I see my role as very much being serving people, and I think that constituents are very ill-served by people working in that physical environment and by the way it's all set up so that we're permanently exhausted.
Yeah.
I think that my constituents would be much better served, as would other constituents, by a more organised, better set up way of working.
Could you see something like remote working for MPs?
Well, we did during COVID. I mean, so we did. My colleagues did that were there before. I'm sure there were ups and downsides to it, but things like voting, it seems mad to me that if I have flu, I can't be on the estate and I can't vote. I mean, I could try and arrange it, but it just seems bonkers to me that we have lots of modern techniques for doing things and we can't seem to employ any of them.
And you still have to walk through a door.
And you have to walk through a door, and you have to, and as you exit the lobby, you have to nod, because apparently in the olden days, people would send their staff to vote in their behalf with scarves around their face. And so they would do this thing where you had to nod so that the scarf would fall down and you would see if you'd sent your servant. So we still have to nod as we leave. I mean, come on. It's just...
And it's all just counted entirely analogue.
No, you tap your pass. It's electronic. This is what's ridiculous. You go through an antiquated old lobby in order to tap your electronic pass, which I could tap anywhere. I could tap it at my house, or I could tap it in, but you have to tap it on a what looks like an iPad, and it says Anna Sabine's voted, and then we still have to go through and be counted manually and be nodded. It's just...
Well, the whole language and terminology around Parliament also is sort of rooted in the great public schools as well. So you know why whips are referred to as whips?
No.
Okay, so in the great public schools, you would have senior boys who were effectively prefects, and their job was to keep order and keep the other boys in order, and they used a whip.
Oh, well, there we go. I like to think there's a lot of people who've been around it a long time who get very attached to it. And I really hope that however long I'm there, I never lose that sense of this is not normal and this is not a normal workplace. I don't want to become institutionalized.
Final question for you before we move on. You know that we're all about storytelling at the Planner, and we have a bit of a thing about changing the narrative around public conversations around planning in the built environment. Given your background in built environment communications and given your current role as an MP, is this something you feel needs to be addressed? Do you think we could be having better public conversations and improve the quality of the public discussion around planning in the built environment?
Yeah, 100%. And to be fair, I and lots of other planning comms professionals have been trying to say this to developers for a long time. What are developers doing? They're building homes for people, and they're building homes that our home is normally the place where the most wondrous things happen, and it's our place of sanctuary. And if we don't have a home, terrible things happen. And yet the industry insists on talking about units and, developable areas and talking about it in the most technocratic language and seeing comms as this kind of frilly add-on, which I don't think is unrelated to the fact it's mainly women working in comms.
Yes.
Actually, your ultimate audience, if you're trying to get planning permission anyway, your ultimate audience is politicians, and the industry forgets that all the time. And actually, as a politician, I'm much more swayed by you talking about building homes for key workers than I am about you telling me about units. And also, the sector is delivering a public good, and you can argue about whether it's right that private business is delivering a public good or not. But there's no storytelling that goes in about why this is important, and that's why opponents of housing are always able to capture that narrative around you're destroying countryside, you're destroying the habitats of this. And I'm not saying they don't have good cases in some cases, but the pro-housing lots never capture that kind of narrative. And I think they should, because I think there's a desperate need for housing in this country. And I think as a politician, I can absolutely now understand, having worked for a long time doing public consultation around this, when I sit there as a politician, whenever a new development comes to my area, I will hear immediately from people that don't want it. I will hear, on the other hand, from people who are in the most grinding housing conditions. I say housing conditions, they're not housed, who are desperate for my help, who I cannot help because there are not enough houses. But those people aren't lobbying me on that specific development because they're frankly too busy being in housing crisis. And so as a politician, it's really hard to go, well, actually, I think this development might be a good thing because actually we really need housing. And I'm really sorry you're upset about it, because we don't hear from supporters, because there's none of that positive narrative. We don't hear from people that think housing is a good thing. So I would, as ever, like I did the whole time I was working in the sector, urge people to try and make positive cases for housing. Make it a bit easier for us politicians to support things. Because at the moment, I take the view that officially I say I can't support or oppose any housing development, because on the one hand, I have constituents I'm serving who are desperately in need of them, and on the other hand, I have constituents who don't like them. But it's really, really hard for politicians. You're in an awkward position if you're only ever hearing from people that don't want new things in the built environment, whether it's housing or energy infrastructure or whatever.
That's an excellent point. And I think that's a very good point to end this particular strand of discussion on. Thank you. Let's move on. Let's talk about women of influence, Laura, because as this podcast is broadcast, we'll be publishing our annual Women of Influence list. So we can talk about it freely now, I think. Laura, what are your thoughts on this year's lists? And why do we do this? Why is it important?
Well, it began when we noticed that only men were being put forward to comment on policies or changes that we were seeing within the profession. And I was getting quite frustrated with having to ask for people to put forward a woman to comment on stuff. And we also noticed that a lot of the senior positions in planning organisations were taken up by middle-aged men. So we started the conversation, and here we are, getting people to submit really good nominations now, really good descriptions of what women are doing in the profession, everything from mentoring to large-scale, nationally significant schemes across the UK and internationally. And we've got a really good selection this year, I think. Really good selection of women this year have been put forward, and I'm excited for you all to see it.
So the list is a celebration of the role that women play in and around planning. So obviously there's a sort of activist side to it, but it's also about trying to correct an imbalance that we identified, as Laura said. Every year we have around 50 women. They cover all aspects of work in planning. They come from all sectors within planning, private sector, public sector, academia. It's one of the best things we do, I think. And I've been a journalist for 30 years, and it's probably the thing I'm most proud of.
Can I tell you why I think it's important? I think it's because it's helped. It's part of a culture of women getting used to putting themselves forward for things. And I think as a woman, it's really awkward to put yourself forward for something. And this idea that you need to build a profile is kind of awkward.
Yes.
And I think anything that encourages women to encourage each other to put themselves forward for something that helps build their profile is really helpful.
I think we're really bad at celebrating what we do and putting forward the work that we do and talking about it, because women can be arrogant if they do that. But if a man does it, they're not arrogant. That language that we use around the same things that each men and women are doing, but we're treated differently for doing it.
And what I really like is the fact that the nominations, they're not formal, they're not coming through PR teams, they're not coming from a corporate place, they're coming from a personal place. So they're coming from somebody who knows the person they're nominating, who's worked with them, who's watched them at work. A good number of the nominations come from men, increasingly, which I think is brilliant. And because as we were discussing last night as well during the conversation, it's important to have male allies.
I hope lots of men are listening to this. I have a horrible suspicion that if it's an IWD podcast, men go, probably won't listen to that one. But we can't change anything without men helping and being allies. And I think there's a lot of men who are very well intentioned but don't realise they have a role in helping with any of this, whether it's with lobbying Matthew Pennycook, whether it's in nominating women for Planner magazine, whatever it is. I think there's a role that men have to play and we need them to step up.
I think that's a good place to draw this to a close. Anna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Really, really informative and really interesting. It's been a great discussion. We wish you the best of luck with your campaign. And let's hope that Matthew Pennycook and Jess Phillips listen to what you have to say and they take notice of your gigantic letter.
Gigantic. Thank you.
Gigantic. Let's make sure there's a photographer there as well. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Ben. That was episode 7 of PlannerPod. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.